Episode 1. Pilot. To kick off this series, we meet Joe Goldberg, an everyday middle-aged man that works at a bookstore, and while working one day, a girl walks in and Joe immediately falls in love with her. Her name is Genevieve Beck, and she is going to school at a local college, and she is looking for new books to read. Joe walks up to her and asks if she needs any help with anything, and she ends up purchasing a book, and when she pays for it with a credit card, Joe jots down the information so he can stalk her later. That night, he scours through all of her social media profiles to learn everything he can about her. Joe lives in an apartment building, and he lives next to a small family that has a young boy named Paco who looks up to Joe because his mom's boyfriend hurts his mom sometimes. After doing his stalking, Joe goes to the address Beck has on file and creeps on her through her window and sees her hooking up with her boyfriend Benji, which makes Joe jealous. The following day at school, even Beck's professor tries pulling moves on her, but she has no clue. All the guys want her. That Friday night, she goes out with her friends and gets pretty drunk, and Joe follows her when she leaves, and he saves her like a true gentleman when she was about to fall. They share a moment, but then Benji shows up to spoil the fun. The following day, we also meet Beck's best friend, Peach, who also seems to be into Beck. Talk about a love triangle or love square. When Beck and Peach are out shopping one night, Joe breaks into Beck's apartment and creeps around even more and luckily isn't caught. The episode ends with Joe asking to meet with Benji, and when Benji gets to the bookstore, Joe knocks him out in the basement. Episode 2. The Last Nice Guy in New York. Joe puts Benji in a glass cage that they keep in the bookstore basement that is used to preserve old, worn-out books. Benji begs Joe to let him out, and even says he can have Beck all to himself. He doesn't care about her in that way, but Joe says he can't do that. Joe leaves him there, and he continues to get close with Beck after saving her life in the last episode, and with Benji not returning her calls or texts, Beck decides to go on a date with Joe. Joe also found a way to hack into her phone so he can see everything that she sees. They go on their first date, and it goes well, and Beck invites him to Peach's party she is throwing that weekend. The following day, Beck's professor schedules a meet with her at a bar which she finds odd, but she still goes, and it's clear his intentions here, and Joe is not a fan because he is stalking her. The professor tries to make a move on her, but she shuts him down, and then he tells her she better not tell anyone what just happened or else she will lose her teaching assistant job and housing. That weekend, they all go to Peach's party, and Peach, in private, tells Joe she knows something is up with him and she's going to figure it out. When Joe gets back to town, he sits down with Benji and they discuss their next steps. Joe tells Benji he knows about a hazing accident that went wrong that resulted in a few deaths, and he could always use that against Benji if Benji went to the police. Joe ponders it, and in the meantime, he goes to blackmail Beck's professor to stop seducing her, and it works. Beck then learns that he did that, and gives him a big old kiss in appreciation. Since he now has Beck, Joe decides the only action he has is to dose Benji with peanut oil, and Benji dies from an allergic reaction. Episode 3. Maybe. Joe, not wanting to be suspicious, has Paco go to the store and get him everything that is on the list, and it is stuff that will help him dispose of the body. Paco's mom's boyfriend Ron learns of this and calls the cops on Joe for being suspicious and sending a kid to get a bunch of unusual supplies at a home improvement store. Joe tells the police that the items were for a community garden he is planting right outside the apartment building, and the cops seems to buy it, but Ron sure doesn't. Later that day, Joe takes Benji's body out into the woods and burns it. He is almost caught by walkers, but narrowly escapes detection. When Joe gets back to town, he is upset to see that Beck has been on Tinder recently and is still going on dates because he thought they were exclusive. Joe sees her hook up with a random Tinder dude, and while getting it on, the bed breaks. The following day, she asks Joe if he will go with her to look at new bed frames, and she fails to mention the part that it broke while she was having sex. She just tells Joe it broke, but he knows the truth. Later that night, Peach isn't feeling well, so she has Beck take her to the hospital, and on the way there, Peach tells Beck to stay away from Joe and that he's creepy. Beck isn't buying it, and she goes to the bookstore the next day and tells Joe she wants to take it slow because she is still hurting after Benji ghosting her. But she does like Joe, she says. Joe says that is fine, and then he talks literature with her which turns her on, and the two go hook up in her new bed. But he doesn't even last 5 seconds, and she is highly disappointed in his love game. Episode 4. The Captain. Beck tells her friends how embarrassing it was for Joe to absolutely suck in bed, and since he can see all of her messages, he sees everything that are saying about him and making fun of him. He also notices a message from someone named the Captain who pays her money and is planning to meet with her that coming weekend. Joe quickly thinks the worst. That weekend, Beck goes to meet with the Captain at a motel, and he makes her dress up in some old throwback clothes because they are going to the Dickens Festival. We soon learn the Captain is actually Beck's father, and he is paying her to come spend time with her other family, and she needs the money, so she obliges. Beck goes to the festival with his family, and of course, Joe is following her and stalking her the whole time. Beck's stepsister tells her that she heard the Captain was about to cut off Beck's money supply as a new kid is on the way, and this really upsets Beck. Meanwhile, back in town, Peaches shows up at the bookstore looking for Joe, and she learns Joe isn't there. He is at the festival, so Peach automatically assumes Joe is stalking Beck, so she calls her to let her know. Right on cue, Beck sees Joe at the festival, but he plays it off like he is really into Dickens festivals and goes every year. She buys it and then introduces Joe to her other family. But they scoff at her, and it just ends with them leaving soon after Beck was a brat to her father. When they back, Joe and Beck get into a fight because he says she could be nicer to her father, and Beck says he has no idea their history with each other. Joe leaves, but that night, Beck goes to his house and apologizes for acting how she did, and they hook up again, but only this time, Joe actually satisfies her. Beck tells her friends how good it was, and everyone is happy for her, except Peach. Episode 5. Living with the Enemy. Peach tells Beck that she got in touch with a literary agent, and she wants Beck to meet him. Peach throws Beck a party for everyone at the bookstore, including the literary agent. Beck wants to be a writer, and having an agent would vastly help that career going forward. Joe overhears Peach telling the agent that he should hook up with Beck, and it's clear now that she is doing this in hopes of splitting Joe and Beck up, as she does not like Joe at all. Joe tells Beck what he heard, but she doesn't believe him and tells him to stop starting drama. An hour or so later, the agent does try making a move on Beck, and she now believes that Joe was telling the truth. She apologizes for not believing him and also is upset with Peach for doing that to try and ruin her relationship. They get in a fight, and a few days later, Peach attempts to hurt herself in an effort to get Beck to spend time with her instead of Joe. Joe realizes that Peach is a problem for his relationship, so when she is out running one day, Joe knocks her out with a rock and leaves her to die. When Joe gets to his apartment, he learns that Paco tried dosing Ron with a ton of sleeping pills to kill him, but it didn't work, and then Ron beats the living hell out of Joe because he thinks Joe told Paco to do this. To make it even worse for Joe, Beck calls him and tells him Peach survived the attack and is in a coma, and he begins to wonder if she could ID him or put two and two together. Episode 6. Amour Fou. Peach wakes up from her coma, and while she doesn't know who the person that hit her was, she does suspect Joe could have done it. To get her mind off of the everything, Peach asks Beck if she will go spend the weekend with her at her parents' vacation home, and Beck says yes. They go out of town, and Joe of course follows them out there. Joe also believes Peach is about to ask Beck to move to Paris with her because he saw a plane ticket with Beck's name on it when he hacked into Peach's computer. When Joe is heading there, he gets in an accident and starts hallucinating his ex-girlfriend Candace for some reason. Joe manages to pull himself together, and he continues over to the house the girls are staying at, and when he gets there, he sees Peach creeping on Beck while she bathes. Peach invites her friend Raj to come over too. Joe is caught off guard when he shows up, and he hides under the bed. Peach tried kissing Beck, but Beck left to call Joe and see how he is doing as she felt bad. While she calls, Peach and Raj have sex on the bed Joe is under. Later, Peach asks Beck if she wants to move to Paris, but Beck says no, and she leaves after they argue. When Beck is gone, Peach catches Joe in her house and threatens to shoot him. Peach also sees Joe wearing Benji's watch, and she is starting to piece it all together. Joe tries leaving and Peach shoots him, but when she double-checks he's dead, he gets up and is able to shoot her. Joe then frames the crime scene to make it look like she did it to herself before he leaves. After he leaves, though, Joe realizes he peed in a jar in the house and left it for the police to find along with the accident he had before arriving near the house. The episode ends with Joe comforting Beck at Peach's funeral. Episode 7. Everything Ship. Joe starts seeing a therapist named Dr. Nikki, and it turns out that Nikki is also Beck's therapist, so Joe is using fake names talking about how Beck has distanced herself from him ever since Peach's death, and how Beck broke up with him a few weeks later. That is the reason she started going to therapy in the first place. She had to talk to someone about Peach's death. Joe recounts the story and says Beck had enough and broke up with him after he accused her of hooking up with her therapist. Nikki, not realizing he is talking about himself and Beck, as Joe is using all aliases and not their real names. Joe learned that they started going out for drinks together and just assumed the worst, that they were hooking up. In present day, Joe sneaks into Nikki's office one night and listens to all of the sessions he had with Beck, and Joe realizes what Beck really needs right now is space. And Joe then goes to Beck and apologizes for being pushy, and he says he will let her go and move on, which she is kind of surprised by. Episode 8. You Got Me, Babe. A time jump of 3 months show that Joe is now dating a new woman named Karen, and he really likes her, but still would leave her for Beck in a heartbeat if Beck wanted. Beck is still single, and she has mainly been focusing on her writing the last few months and not as much dating. She even landed a book deal that dealt with Peach's death. She does find herself from time to time getting on Joe's social media pages and is kind of jealous Karen is with Joe now. Karen and Joe go out for ice cream one night, and Beck shows up there as well, so she might be the stalker one now. She just wanted to see Joe in person, and Joe says hi. That night, Beck texts him and says she hopes he is doing well, and Joe realizes that Beck is missing him, but he doesn't feel that is fair to Karen. A few days later, Beck asks Joe to go help her with some writing ideas, and the two end up hooking up on a ferry ride over the bay. Beck realizes this is wrong and Joe is cheating on Karen, but Joe says Beck is always the girl he is thinking about. The affair lasts for many weeks afterwards. Beck realizes how good Joe really was to her when they were dating, and she tells Joe they can't continue hooking up because she really likes Karen and doesn't deserve to be cheated on. Joe then picks Beck and breaks up with Karen. A few days later, Karen runs into Beck and tells Beck to be careful, or she could end up like Joe's last girlfriend, Candace. This then intrigues Beck, and she wants to find out what Karen is talking about. Episode 9. Candace. Beck asks Joe about Candace, and Joe doesn't really give any answers, and it's clear he doesn't really want to talk about it. Beck does some research of her own, and she finds Candace's pages and sees that she went radio silent right after the day she broke up with Joe. Beck goes to meet one of Candace's friends, Maddie, and she tells Beck that Candace cheated on Joe, and Joe did not take it well. Beck straight up asks Joe about it again, and this time he says a little more and says after their breakup, Candace changed her name and went abroad to start fresh. We then see a flashback to Candace and Joe first meeting, very similar to how he met Beck, and they dated for a while. But then Joe found out she was cheating on him with a music producer, and Joe pushed the man to his death, but it was declared an accident, not murder. Candace found out and told Joe she never even loved him and to never talk to her again, and that was the last he ever saw of her. In present day, Joe takes Beck to meet Mooney, Joe's only father figure in his life and owner of the bookstore. Mooney tells Beck that Candace was a terrible person and he's glad they broke up and stopped talking. Beck doesn't know what to think of it all. She starts to wonder if Joe might have killed Candace for cheating on him. Throughout the next couple weeks, Beck starts getting distant again and hiding her phone more. Joe breaks into Dr. Nikki's office and learns that Beck is having an affair with Nikki, just like he thought all along. She's been cheating on him all this time. Joe confronts her about it, and she apologizes and says she doesn't want to end up like Candace, and Joe says he didn't do anything to Candace and lets her go. When Joe is out one day, Beck breaks into his apartment and finds a box in his ceiling that contains Benji's teeth, Peach's phone, and her underwear. It's like his trophy box. Joe arrives back home and now has no choice but to drug her and put her in the glass cage. Episode 10. Bluebeard's Castle. Season finale. Joe tries to explain to Beck why he did everything he did, and he didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. Beck tries to reason with him and says she understands why he killed them. It was his undying love for her. Basically trying to manipulate Joe into letting her go, but Joe isn't that dumb. Beck realizes this method won't work, and her next idea is to write up a story that would make it look like someone else killed Benji and Peach, and they could publish the book and Joe would get off scot-free. Joe ponders the idea, and he tells her he wants her to frame Dr. Nikki as the true culprit, and he will take the fall for the murders Joe committed. Joe gives her a typewriter and tells her to get started, and once the book is published, he will let her free. A week passes and Joe starts to think she is being genuine, and when she says she wants a kiss, Joe opens up the cage, stabs him, and sprints to the basement door. The door is locked and Paco is standing there, and she begs him to open up the door, but Paco doesn't, as Joe is his best friend. Joe then gets her back and kills her. Joe then publishes the story that Beck did actually write, and it incinerates Dr. Nikki for being the killer of all three of them because he was jealous, and Nikki is soon arrested. The book was so good that Beck became a best-selling author even though she was dead. Back at the apartment complex, Ron is going on a tear and threatening Paco, so Joe steps in and kills Ron to protect Paco and tells him he won't be hurting them anymore. Paco and his mom Claudia then move to California to get a fresh start. A few months pass and Joe is at the bookstore when a woman comes in that catches Joe's eye, and it is none other than Candace, his ex. And that is it for Season 1 of You. We'll be doing the full series, so I hope you can check those out when I get them uploaded. Thanks for watching.